Hello, my name is Denilson Anastasio, and I'll be presenting a session on GitOps at scale. The idea of this session is to deploy Cloud Paks to a remote fleet of clusters. These clusters could be deployment staging production servers or could just be redundant servers in a production environment. Cloud Paks are IBM groupings of software across an entire discipline like business automation, AIOps, or integration. And these can be potentially large rather than complex deployments, and we want to get to a point where an administrator can see them as building blocks, as smaller components, and have a single point of view for where they are deployed, the health of the clusters in the fleet, and whether additional action is required and what type of action. Before getting into the live demo, just some recap of concepts in here. The idea of GitOps is that all of the configuration for the target environment is located in a repository under certain paths, under certain branch, and that also the Git part of that also brings workflows such as pull requests for configuration changes, which would give people like IT admins and deployment managers the opportunity to review and comment and even modify these requests. In terms of our demo today, we'll be using the Red Hat OpenShift GitOps operator, which is based on Project Argo. And for the fleet management, we'll be using Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management. I'll refer to it as Rackham from this point on. It's shorter to say it. It's a mouthful. Otherwise, there's two basic concepts. It can do much more than what we're about to show now, but two of concepts that will be explored are governance policies, which is basically descriptions of things you want in a matching cluster, and then placement policies that indicate which types of clusters should receive those policies. Once you bring them together, Rackham can start to make clusters look the way or have the things we want in a policy, right? And that's what gives you your consistency. You're no longer managing discrete clusters, you're managing policies, you're doing governance, right? You'll see what matches or doesn't match the governance and why not, and then point you to action at a macro level. Once you dive a bit deeper, and like I mentioned, GitOps would have folders that need to be applied to a cluster. You will see in this repo that you have an individual folder per Cloud Pak, and also individual folders to configure the Rackham server itself. Once you bring all of these things together, you can start from an OpenShift cluster, so like your day zero type of environment setup, add Argo to that cluster, the OpenShift GitOps operator. You will synchronize the Rackham configuration, which will deploy Rackham, configure the multi-cluster hub, put whatever other configuration we may need there to make that Rackham server match our policy for it. And once all of that is in place, that configuration of the Rackham server includes the Cloud Pak policies, an administrator would be able to just go to the Rackham console, apply some labels to a cluster that immediately would match the cluster to a policy, and then Rackham would deploy the software to that location. You will see what you would encounter there are basically transcriptions of the installation instructions of these Cloud Paks. They are in that repo that's linked in this presentation. And you will have an app of apps. That's an Argo term for a parent application that brings in with it all the applications in that same folder. It's a nice way of adding a whole group of applications to the Argo server. And each of those applications will have a pointer to a path in the repository, plus a lot of other synchronization hints and guidance for Argo. But once you get into one of those folders, what you see are basically transcriptions of resources from the installation documents to the repository. On the Rackham side, same thing. Instead of deploying a Cloud Pak, we're deploying the Rackham server proper, and the resources are policies and placement rules. Or in the cases of the seeds repository, it would be the subscription definitions for the OpenShift GitOps operator, for Rackham itself, configurations of the Argo and Rackham server, and so on. This is the last slide before getting into the live demo. The way all of this comes together in Rackham, once all of these resources are in the cluster, is that you will see for each Cloud Pak a policy object indicating what you want in the cluster, and whether, in this case, we are using must-have, which is like a light matching, right? That's saying if this object must exist with this name and type in the target cluster, but the object in the policy may not have the definition for every single attribute in the target cluster, which would allow an admin to modify those attributes of the Argo application that are not part of the policy. It's a bit flexible there. And enforcement, right? If there is no match, Rackham will apply the resource forcibly to the target destination. The placement rule here is saying clusters that have this attribute will be a match, and ultimately is the placement binding that puts the two together. Any cluster matching that placement rule will receive that policy. So let's get to the live demo. I mentioned that the starting point is an OpenShift cluster with the GitOps operator. If you go to that repository, you will find those instructions in there when it talks about fleet of clusters with governance. There are step-by-step instructions on how to add Argo to the cluster and also how to add the parent app of apps for Rackham definition in that Argo server. And there is also a description of all the policies in the repository, but we'll see them in the live demo. Once you complete following those instructions, your would-be Rackham server, which is about, in this case in here, after the synchronization, is already a Rackham server, right? It has all the attributes required for it. If I go into seeds, I will see that it has things like the subscriptions that for Rackham itself, plus the other ones that it brought with it. It's all synchronized and ready to go. You will also notice I'm not using the main branch, I'm using the development branch in here because there are certain things I don't want in the main repo that are just useful for this demo. And now I can launch the console for my Rackham server. In the welcome page, you'll see a number of things we're not showcasing today. There's more than GitOps and Rackham in terms of observability, management creation, and of clusters, pools of clusters, and so on. So we were just covering the GitOps portion. That Argo application, the Rackham Cloud Packs application, had all the policies, placement rules, and bindings for Cloud Packs, and the Rackham Seeds had also the policies and placement rules for GitOps proper. You see there are a few matches in here for each of them. I can edit them from here. It's like if I go to that one I was showing for Cloud Pack for integration, I would be able to edit in here. Say, I don't want it to enforce the policy, I just want to be informed about it. But you will remember I have this whole cluster under a GitOps model, so all of the definitions are coming from the Git repo, not from an admin. And Argo will notice the configuration drift and show me that what it's not in place. Let's see, it should just filter on out of sync. This is the policy I edited by hand, and it's telling me what's the difference, and it just fixed it. And if I go back to Rackham, I should see this changing back to what it was. So that's what using a GitOps model means, right? You can't log into a server and go performing changes. The infrastructure will say it's got to be in the branch, it's got to be in a repo, and approve it and merge it into a trackable process, not something that can be changed by hand. I can go to my applications tab and browse a little through the placement rules. If I go to advanced configuration, I'll see all of those placement rules that were in the GitOps repository, including my example here for Cloud Pack for integration, where it has that label for CP4I. And in here also there is a cluster matching here because OpenShift 4.6 needed slightly different definitions. Don't worry about that right now, but that's why there is this whole blocking here. And let's see the clusters that I left prepared for this demonstration. I have 3 of them. One is already configured with everything. It's gone through the demo, and I'll just use it to show the end result. These 2 are not. So let me use one for one Cloud Pack and the other for the other. So CP4I, you will see that I'm using a special value in here. Once we have a deep dive session on the actual policies and all the tricks that are, I won't say tricks, maybe best practices or clever practices that are used to align the Argo applications with the Rackham policies. But basically, this policy is written so that the value of the label will be used as the Argo destination namespace for the application. And in the policy definition itself, there is a place where it says, use the label value as in this location of the file. And I also mentioned that there is a branch a special branch I want to use. So that is my parameter here. Same thing in the policy, there is a place that says grab the value from this label in the cluster and use that as, in this case, as the target revision of the Argo application. That should initiate some deployment in that cluster, and I'll do cp4 AIOps in the other one. And keep in mind, just with these two labels, what we have is Rackham right now is there is a match, right, for the governance policies. If I go to governance, I'll see 2 extra clusters matching the GitOps policy. I had 2, now 4, and it should show me the list of the matching ones. And see that all of them have GitOps deployed to them. I had a pause in the recording here, so that usually would take a couple minutes for Argo to be completely up and running, but they are already set up in there. And I could just go to one of these clusters, and I should see the Argo launch page and be able to launch the Argo console in that cluster. There it is. And because it had the match to AIOps, you see that the parent app was added. Let me filter a little, and it brought in with it the 2 dependent apps, and they are already synchronized using that branch and ready to go. So if I go back to that cluster, I don't think the entire Cloud Pak is ready yet. There is a lot of asynchronous activity still going on, but I should be able to launch at least the NSC, the admin hub. I don't think it's fully functional yet, but it's progressing, and you see minimal effort, right? I just label these clusters. I knew those Argo applications for the individual Cloud Paks were sound. They've been developed over time, and my policy just said I want them in that target location. All of a sudden, you're managing very complex software, lots of capabilities, just in a very abstract model where you just say, I want that in a remote location. And consistently too, I have no question about how these were set up and know what I'll get in these final locations. And I can also manage things by application, by Argo application in this case. They are native elements of the Rackham deployment model. You'll see here I have Cloud Pak for integration in 2 clusters. This one was already set up ahead of the demo, and I just wanted to show everything ready in there. And this is the one I just deployed a moment ago. Again, it's showing here as ready, but we know there is offline and configuration still going in those clusters. But in an hour or so, they will be fully functional. We could also add governance policies that would tell me that a certain set of, say, config maps, secrets, or resources in the target cluster need to have a certain status, and that would also allow me to see here in the Rackham cluster not only whether they're deployed, which would be one policy, but also different policies that says it's healthy, right? That's lots of capability there. And if I go back to my clusters, I should be able to initiate the deployment of other Cloud Paks in the same cluster even. I could say that I also want AIOps in that original cluster. That should trigger the deployment. And also now you have something that's composable, right? I said now I want 2 different policies matching this cluster because it has the labels for the 2 Cloud Paks. And if I launch that console, I should start to see that the installation taking place. Yeah, well, it's a lot of them. I think there may be some things still under deployment. And that concludes the demonstration. As a recap, we started from a GitOps repo where it contains two different blocks of Argo applications, one for Cloud Paks, another to configure a Rackham server. We configured a basic basic OpenShift cluster to deploy Argo and Rackham to it, and also used Argo to configure that Rackham server with a set of policies and placement rules to deploy Argo applications for the Cloud Paks to a remote fleet of servers. And then just by labeling clusters in Rackham, we got Rackham to match them to these clusters and start to push out the entire GitOps infrastructure of the OpenShift GitOps operator, as well as configure those remote infrastructures with the Argo applications for the matching Cloud Pak, and start a deployment in there. And then from that point on, we can use just Rackham to see the entire system, right? An entire fleet of clusters where each application is deployed and navigated from all these different angles. We can start from clusters, we can start from applications, we can start from our policies and see what has drifted or is not aligned, and then deep dive into the causes and the resolution. And also ensuring that all of this is consistent across the entire space, whatever something is defined in a policy, and it's what you're gonna get. And you don't have these surprises or these snowflakes of clusters where everything is slightly different from one another. I hope you enjoyed this. There will be more presentations exploring some of the details of this demo. If you want to build something like this, or just get some ideas on some of the alignments between Rackham and Argo, stay tuned for the next presentations in this series. Thank you for watching.